Roll countdown. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Ryan Keenan Realtor Show. And today I am joined by mortgage expert Padi Goodspeed. Hey Padi, how are you?
I'm fabulous. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much for being on here. As you know, we're going to discuss, there's been a lot of movement in the Federal Reserve as far as interest rate hikes, and we just kind of want to unpack it and break it down for everybody from a knowledgeable professional and dive deep on some topics so that people can have a greater understanding of their financial future as well as economic policy that's currently going on.
Sounds good. Yeah,
So
I'm excited to talk about it.
awesome. Good. Yeah. Well, I'm really excited to have you on the show. I met you at the Elevate Live event in Santa Cruz, and then we had the VIP dinner, and we briefly were talking about the economy and um at that dinner. And so I thought it would be a great opportunity to just continue the conversation here on YouTube. And so I'd love for you to just start and tell everybody a little bit about your background and kind of more about you, Patty.
Sure. Yeah. So I started in the business right out of college. I just started college and my girlfriend said, "Hey, you got to meet this one mortgage broker. She's amazing. I think you would totally love what she does." So I did, and the rest is history. I have been in the business literally since the first year that I started college. I've been here for 20 years. It's the only thing I've ever done as an adult. I live, breathe, eat, sleep it. I've never gotten sick of it. I think we're so fortunate to be in a career that is ever changing, constantly challenging us. This morning, when I did a morning show, we started by talking about my numbers. I am proud of my accomplishments. I am proud that I have funded nearly $1 billion in residential real estate. I'm really proud of the fact that I am one of the top 100 women in the country in this space. But really, we share the numbers. We share the numbers. And actually, the other important one is that I'm still on pace to do 100 million this year, despite this drastic shift in demand and with interest rates. And I think why we share the numbers, many times people want their accomplishments to be applauded. I don't. It's a matter of resilience, right? I'm taking the
Mm.
same punches to my face that everyone else is taking right now, and I'm just going to keep showing up. And I think that that's my overarching message to the community, is that we're all going through the volatility, we're all feeling it. And I like to connect with people at a human level to say, we don't talk about the numbers to say, "Oh, look at me." No, we're talking about the numbers to instill the hope that there is going to be ups and downs in this business. There's massive volatility, but you got to take the punches and you got to keep showing up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I could totally speak to that. I definitely find a lot of comfort and strength in being in the trenches with my teammates, doing interviews like this, where I'm able to talk to people that are going through the same market that I am, and they might have a
Yes.
different perspective or bring something different to the table. And I think that's really what makes this time more special, because it can be tough, it can be difficult, especially if you feel like you're going through it yourself. So to be able
Yeah.
to align yourself with the people that I think really can see the benefit and see the value and love what they're doing, it's just another bump in the road. And it's not something that's really that you think about. Like you said, you just keep showing up. And I think that's really important.
Yes. So let's get to it.
Awesome. So first of all, I just wanted to start off for people that aren't familiar, maybe they're brand new to the financial space. If you could just briefly tell us what interest rates are and the way how they work.
Sure. So interest rates, mortgage interest rates in particular, is I think what you're referring to.
Hmm.
It's the rate that it's the cost of borrowing money, essentially, in layman's terms, right? So if you're borrowing money and you have to pay back that money, you don't just pay back what you borrowed. There's interest that's added to that. And that's generally what we call the cost of money. So when people ask me, when kids in particular ask me what I do, I say, I sell money. That's what I do. And the interest rate that you're paying on that money it basically determines the cost of acquisition for that asset. And then if you say, "Hey, I'm buying a house and I'm going to live here because I know it's going to help me establish wealth or help me in my plans to leave some, create generational wealth," then you have to consider the cost of the acquisition of that asset. And that's where the interest rate comes in. And that's why everyone's in an uproar that the interest rates are so high, because essentially your payment on a $350,000 home today is the same as what your payment would have been on a $550,000 or $600,000 home 2 years ago. So that's why it's such a big topic right now.
Right. Understandably so. And so why? So we're talking about mortgage rates, right? Mortgage interest rates. So briefly, if you could just describe what interest rates are as far as, like you said it as far as mortgage rates, but what is it on the bigger national scale, what the Federal Reserve is raising right now, and why are they raising them?
Okay, good question. So the Fed funds rate, when you hear that the chairman of the Federal Reserve is coming to speak, Jerome Powell, what you're hearing is that's the interest rates that they're talking about control the money supply. So to break it down, to give you an example, it's the rate that banks would pay when they're borrowing from each other, and it controls the amount of money that is in circulation. So when the interest rate was down to 0.25%, and actually President Trump was trying to get them to take it down to negative territory, it essentially meant that the money that was being circulated in the country to make businesses flow and to create growth in the economy was practically free. So this is not the rate that we pay. If that was the case, then all of the mortgages would have been at 0.25%, 0.25% last year. So it's important to realize that almost every single time the Fed is going to speak and it impacts, we know that they're going to raise the Fed funds rate. Someone calls me and said, I know rates are going to go up tomorrow. And that's just not how it works. So it's the control of the money supply. So it's very similar to years ago. Nobody really had a problem with it. No one was in an uproar because everyone was making a lot of money and everyone was spending money and people were growing. So, but you heard a lot of chatter about the government printing money. They're essentially printing money. So by keeping the cost of the money supply so low, what they're doing is essentially printing money, throwing money into the economy. Everyone's spending money. Everything's growing rapidly. And then now they're saying, uh-oh, this is a big problem. And many are arguing that this is a problem that you created. So if you make something, in this particular case, money, more accessible, then of course more people are going to go use it and take it and so on. So you have a massive amount of debt accumulated over the last several, maybe decade, over the last 5 to 6 years in particular, because the cost of borrowing money was so low. And many people will tell you to leverage debt. So there's only a small amount of people that properly leverage debt against an income producing asset, but there are a majority of people that leverage too much debt against their income, which then becomes a problem in times like this when the money supply gets tightened. So now if they raise the cost of money, the Fed's goal is very simple, to keep it in very simple terms. They want you to stop spending money. They want you to stop, because as long as the demand for any good or service is high, then people are going to pay more for that demand because the supply simply cannot keep up with the demand. So you hear terms like price stabilization. So the Fed is saying, if we tighten the money supply, we raise the rates, and we make it not as easy for businesses to function, then what we're going to see is that less people are going to have enough money to go out and buy things. And as long as that can stop, then we can create price stabilization, balance supply and demand, and get things back in order. The problem is, if they don't take this aggressive approach to what they're doing with what I mean by an aggressive approach is that yesterday the Fed raised the Fed funds rate by another 75 points. That's 3 times in a row. The last time they did it, that was 2 times in a row, which hadn't happened since the 80s. So this is a very aggressive stance against inflation. And they will be raising the Fed funds rate again in November. I'm 90% sure of that. Why 90 instead of 100? Is because the Fed also does make it clear that they make decisions one meeting at a time. They're looking to see how the market responds to their aggressive approach. Anything that comes out of their mouth, there's their policy, and then there's how the market responds to it, which is really what impacts mortgage interest rates. So I know that was a long answer, but I hope that was helpful.
No, that was really helpful. So I mean, as far as the money supply and money, and just to kind of asked a follow-up question to your answer, which I really appreciate. Um, if we see people spending less money, but interest rates are high, and we see less money in the economy, which is ultimately what the Fed, their goal is, as well as the jobs, which we'll get into that. But if we see people spending less, does that create a stagflationary environment? And if so, can you just elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. So stagflation is when inflation rates remain high and unemployment is also high. So let me tell you what when we'll be in stagflation. The Fed needs to increase the unemployment rate to 4.4% in order to put a damper in this inflation number. So we're at 8.26 now. We were at 5.25% inflation last year, and the goal is 2%. Do you understand the difference between 8 and 2? It's really, really big. So, in order to do that, people have to stop spending money. And when they tighten the money supply and corporations have less of an opportunity to offer more jobs, and it's hard to answer this without breaking each point down. So let me tell you what I mean by that. Right now, there are 2 jobs available for every 1 person in the labor force. So
Mm,
and for 3 months in a row, more than 370,000 new jobs were created. So we're looking around in real estate thinking that the world is on fire, but wait a minute, the job market is strong. So it's like dating someone and getting mixed signals. So we're getting mixed signals from the economy. Wait a minute, I thought you said that we're in shambles, there's inflation, there's a problem, but there are still jobs available. So
mhm,
in a stagflation period, you have high inflation rates, which means we can't get this 8% inflation rate under control and unemployment begins to rise. So not
mm,
only are people losing their jobs, but prices are not getting stable and prices are not coming down. And then it's like if you imagine a Western where you got 2 guns pointed at each other and it's a duel and we're just sitting there like, all right, who's gonna break first? And then that's kind of what I visualize stagflation to be like. So
mm,
we're not there yet, but that's where we're headed. That's more likely, that's more realistic than hyperinflation. And
mhm,
what we need to realize is that the Fed's approach and what they think that they're doing being a solution, being that what they're doing, they think is an excellent solution because if they don't drastically slam the brakes on the money supply and prices continue to rise, there's going to be a huge problem. I was telling my mom, I was trying to explain it to her as well, and I was like, this bottle of water that's on the table, would you pay $30 for it? We have to get prices under control. We have to
right.
deal with this period of time where there's going to be some suffering. And to understand, to put that into perspective, a 4.4% unemployment rate means over 1.3 million people lose their job. And when you think about that number, maybe some would argue that that's not a huge casualty in the grand scheme of things when you look at the population of the country. But when you're
Mhm,
thinking about real estate, if you think about it, everyone who's in real estate who's actually doing deals knows that we have an inventory problem still. There's not enough
mhm,
inventory. And the houses that are on the market and the sellers that are selling, they have to sell. Who would sell at a discount unless they had to? There's some sort of life pressure that's on them right now, downsizing, retirement, divorce, I had a baby, whatever the deal might be, job change. And so when you have an inventory problem and you have higher the potential of prices not dropping, and then you also have people losing their jobs, you're going to lose even more of the demand that you're seeing here, and eventually that
mm,
could further dive prices back down. So we
mm,
we have a lot of uncertainty, and I know that in
mm.
2023, I think it's best to buckle our seatbelts to realize that over the next 18 to 8 to 14 months, anyone that tells you that they can understand where this data is going is not telling you the truth.
Right. That's right. And like, so what would you say to somebody that, isn't a high income earner, that's struggling to put food on the table right now during this inflationary period? I mean, how are families gonna cope with this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Right now, I've been saying over and over again, we have I think in about 8 months ago, the exact number was that the average American was spending $460 more. As real estate
Mm,
professionals, we really need to stop talking about our business models and our business plans with each other in these settings and stop being a real estate expert for just a second and become more human. So if I'm talking to
Mm,
someone who needs, I talk to someone who has to move out of their apartment because they slap some paint on it and they're increasing the rent dramatically. So they don't want to rent anymore. They want to buy. They have 2 months to get out of their house and they barely have enough saved to get by. So we're talking about the
mm,
difference between taking a down payment assistance program or maybe renting for a little bit longer. When we're
mm,
talking to these people, we're not thinking about the fact that their income hasn't changed. There's a potential of a job loss in the future, and they're
mhm,
spending on average more than $500 a month, especially in California, just to eat and just to get from point A to point B. So I think if we start to communicate with people from that perspective, it's going to change the way we connect with buyers and
mm,
sellers in this market. It's really critical, in my opinion, to take a more human approach and kind of step away from the data a little bit. You got to know the numbers, you have to know what's going on, but you have to remember people are suffering right now. They're
mhm.
afraid, there's uncertainty, and they're spending more money just to live.
Yeah, yeah. That's a
So
really good point.
to answer your question about what I would do, it depends on what level we're talking about. There are in some communities you might see people sharing resources. You might see more community things pop up. Community resources for food even. You might see a higher level of defaults that take place. If people lose their job and they have sufficient equity, they'll probably work out some sort of modification with the bank, but you might see an increase in defaults and mortgages as well as a result of the constraints that are going to be placed on the overall economy and efforts to reduce the inflation rate. So I think
Mhm,
you're going to you have to be community type people to get through tough times. Whether that means getting closer to your family, if you're
mm.
young, you move back in with mom and dad and contribute a little bit there. There's a lot of things that could take place like that to help people get through a recession.
Right.
And I think it's
Awesome.
important to know. I'm sorry to ramble, but I do
No,
think it's
no
important
problem.
to know there's almost like this joke, this inside joke in the finance community about how the feds are almost embarrassed or ashamed or allergic to the word recession. They're not saying recession, but the growth
Mhm.
that's being predicted is so low at 0.2% and 1.2% next year is that it's like that's like they're saying we're going to slow down like crazy, but we're not going to say we're going backwards, and we're not going to call this a recession. So when I use the word recession, it's informally.
Right, right. And then, so what would you say to somebody, like what what is the benefit? Are there benefits of owning real estate during inflationary times, like an asset versus liability during inflation?
Inflation, of course, and a recession. So in an inflationary time, obviously you're going to be able to buy. You still want to try to find a hot deal, and you know that prices are going up. I don't bargain shop for a lot of things, but when it comes to real estate, I bargain shop. I bought my own primary residence in the height of the pandemic with the real estate craze because of being patient for $80,000 below market, and that would be considered an inflationary period where I had a drastic gain in equity because of my purchase price. And so now what I think you might have meant is that if you're buying during a recession, now if you're a buyer,
Mhm.
when people ask me, who do we focus on right now, buyers or sellers? I'm like, hello, get the buyers excited. If you're a buyer and you haven't bought yet, about 3 years ago, you were complaining that cash offers were just ruining your life, that everyone was bidding with cash and you couldn't buy. Then you started complaining during the pandemic that everyone was willing to pay a premium above even the appraised value to get the bid, so you couldn't compete and you stepped out of the game. Now the prices are down. You can get seller credits and you're complaining about the interest rates, right? So at some point, you have to make a decision about when you're going to get off the fence. The simple trade off right now in a more recessionary period in real estate for a higher interest rate is the lower cost of the asset. There's a reason why institutional buyers are still heavily pursuing single family homes throughout the United States, including distressed ones, because there's still scarcity in real estate. That means that there's never going to be enough for the amount of people that need it. So if you are on the fence about buying the property and the interest rates are scaring you and the difference in the payment is troublesome and it's adding pressure, you have to make a decision. A, can I afford it? And B, if you can still afford to buy a property, in my opinion, the trade-off for the higher rate is going to be the cost difference in the property, and try to find something that you can negotiate the seller to pay for half, if not all of the closing costs.
Nice. All right. Good. Good to know. And then, so let's just talk a little bit. We're kind of jumping around here a little bit, but I want to try to make sure that we get to all these points. Um, what is the 10-year treasury, and how does that uh, relate to mortgage rates?
So the 10-year treasury and the movement in that is kind of what people put a lot of their they bet a lot that on that number to see where the economy is headed. And you might have to edit this because I'm gonna have to look that up. I want to say it
Okay.
was 3.97, but I forgot. Hold
Okay.
on. The 10-year bond. It was moving this morning.
Let's see. I go on a mortgage news daily.
3.563. Yeah,
Okay.
3.563. Yeah, I think that's what it is today. It was moving. I wanted to say 3.97, but I didn't think it got that high. And
Yeah.
for the 10-year treasury, essentially what you're seeing is that the movement there really does indicate whether or not we're in a recession. And I think I need to prepare. I think you should probably edit that part out because we're going to do we need to go more in depth with that, and I'm not prepared for that one. I need to have those
Okay.
numbers ready. Yeah, but the
Okay.
10-year, yeah, good question. Edit that one out.
Okay. All right. We won't include that question.
Okay.
Uh, and then let's talk. Can we talk a little bit about the geopolitical tensions, Russia, and my question is, and I haven't gotten a clear answer to this, and I can't really figure it out. And I mean, same thing with the stimulus plan that Biden did. As far as that money, I think it was like $3 trillion. I think we just gave another $3 billion to Ukraine in aid. So, does that money have to be printed? Like, in other words, are they printing that money that we're giving, or is that becoming debt to the country, and that just doesn't show up on balance sheets and doesn't affect inflation?
Well, giving money to the other countries in aid absolutely impacts us because it becomes a debt that's paid back through the US tax dollars, right? The taxes
Okay.
that we pay pays back that money. It does contribute significantly because, well, many would argue, why are you sending billions of dollars to Ukraine when you need to be sending that money to places like Michigan or Puerto Rico that are part of the United States that are completely falling apart and suffering? So
Mhm.
essentially, why are we helping the foreign countries when we have so many problems in our own backyard? So I guess that would be the more political piece to the question. And then you have, of course, the finances, which is the United States creates so much of a problem with their spending, which creates a problem with the budget, which creates a problem with how the economy. So yeah, I think that that is a major problem. And there's a lot of people against the money being spent to send to Ukraine. Someone commented on my reel that if you put Trump back in office, we wouldn't be having this problem with Russia and Ukraine, and we wouldn't be dealing with this inflation problem. And
Yeah.
I still think unless you want us to kind of you should probably edit that one out too, although it's a good question. I didn't thoroughly prepare for that one, and I can pull the data on it to see exactly how it impacts us. But when you have money that goes overseas to the other countries, it's paid back through the US dollars. All the money that's spent by the government is paid back through the taxes that we pay. And so we become further and further in debt. So what the true impact is over
Mm.
the long period of time is that income taxes will go up. And if
Mm.
income taxes go up and wages aren't meeting that and prices are higher, it puts
Mhm.
people at a big problem in terms of their ability to spend. So
Mm.
maybe from this point, you can add this note here is that the thing that the Fed wants to do is they need to be able to say that if we don't solve this inflation problem, essentially what we're doing is we're murdering people's ability to spend money. The purchasing power goes away because you barely have enough money to live. So if you
Mhm.
imagine if the country gets further and further in debt and that impacts our income tax brackets, then what happens is people have a lot less money to spend and eventually home ownership becomes something that is really far-fetched for a lot of people.
Mm.
You shouldn't have to make over $1 million a year to be able to buy a single family home. Do you agree?
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. 100%. Um, Yeah, I mean, I also have this theory that all the homes right now that are sitting longer aren't desirable for the number one demographic that's buying homes. Millennials don't want to buy homes and fix them up. It doesn't make sense in this market. And, they're looking for more tech savvy type homes. And so nobody wants to pay $1.2 million to replace carpet and knock out walls. And, it at that price point, I think it should be more turnkey. And that's just, you know, my advice as a real estate agent, and I tell that to my clients all the time. And they ask me, and I say, it's up to you. What's your walkaway price? And so, um,
Well,
I'll probably edit that.
the
Yeah.
point that you're making is extremely relevant in the market today, because when the property does look good and it's well kept, and there has been some nice touches to it before it hits the market, it's not lasting long, because
Right.
again, we have an inventory problem. If the
Right.
house needs a lot of work, that's where I have a client right now who's in contract for a $360,000 purchase in
Hmm.
Stockton, California, and the
Hmm.
seller's paying for 100% of the closing costs. In addition to that, they're adding another 2% for the rate buy down.
Wow.
That house is not in good condition. Do you think they'd be doing that if the house was in good condition?
No.
And I'll give you another example. One in the Bay Area that we're closing at 1.69 million. The house
Hmm.
actually appraised for 50,000 under and went into contract 200 grand above ask price. It
Wow.
was in absolute perfect condition, staged to the T, and it was beautiful. And the buyers
Yeah.
were swimming over the property. So you made a very important point. If you do want to sell because you have to sell, that extra $5,000 or $10,000 to make the house look right and to really stand out will definitely go a long way, even in this market.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I always tell sellers that too, and it's like, they're like, should I replace the counter? And I'm like, well, it's how much is it going to cost to replace it? Oh, 10,000. Okay. Well, do you think you're going to make that 10,000 back in the price,
Mhm.
where we want to list it at? And so it's like, I want to make sure those prices are adjusted for, because in this market you could list something, but people want deals. I mean, I know I work with a ton of buyers, and all my buyers want deals, and I want to get deals for all my buyers. And so even if it's listed at a certain price, I try to come in a little bit under, just because of the, well, based on the market conditions and how many offers and yada yada. But like, you know I always tell my sellers, hey, like, if you want to put this much into it, you have to reflect that in the price, because there's no guarantee you're going to get that back for the price, or you're just willing to put it into it, and just because you want to. So it's like, it's important to know that too, because I think there are a lot of people that are like, want to they think they put a bunch of money to the house and they think it's going to automatically raise the price of the house, but it doesn't. And so there's so many other factors that go into it. Your marketing, your comps in the neighborhood, like all these different factors that go into that. And so if you're going to put money into your remodel or into something, or putting a new counter or whatever it is, that money has to be thought about in the closing costs or in the price. And so I always try to do that, so there's no surprises and no hiccups. And so far, it's worked out well. So
Perfect.
yeah. um so let's see what else here. I feel like we kind of got off a little bit off the topic of the feds, and I'm kind of, so I'm trying to figure out in my mind where I should edit this. So you don't want to talk about the
Well,
10-year
if you talk about
treasury.
the 10-year treasury and the geo, I think it would be better if I
Okay.
had more facts. So I think we
Sure.
can talk about that on the next one, and I can
Yeah.
plan for it. We could just start with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want
That would
I
be
want to have
awesome.
the data ready. The rest of the stuff I know very fluently. The other stuff I need to look
Yeah.
up, because the 10-year treasury is a great question.
Yeah.
It does have the indicator of how the economy is doing, and I want to explain that more fluently.
Right. Okay. Awesome. And then
For
as
the
far
Ukraine
as
piece,
yeah, good.
no, it's okay. Go ahead. I'll prepare for that one too.
Okay. Awesome. And then so I'm trying to think of just my I learned all my financial knowledge on YouTube, but like I binge watch Ray Dalio and um and all these different financial experts and learn about all these different things as much as I can. So so I guess to preface that, and I'm not going to use this in part of the recording, but I would probably start here, is where do you think ultimately we're headed? And I know the Federal Reserve is trying to limit the amount of money that people are spending and get the money out of the economy, because during COVID, we had a ton of money and rates were low and money was cheap. And it was like, to use lack of a better word, like the Fed was going to take away the punch bowl at the party. And then people were going to, still think in their mind that we're back in those times or money is cheap, and now we're learning that money's not cheap. It's actually, the dollar is very expensive. So with the Fed trying to get the money out of the economy, but and not have the economy heat up like it has been the past couple of years, and one was like a COVID thing, and and so there's all these catalysts in the market. Where do you think we're going to land on the scale of things? Can they take the money out without going too far the other way now, without turning it into, like you said, that not hyperinflation, but maybe stagflation or some kind of in between there?
I think that's a really good question that a lot of people have. If what are they doing? They're crashing. Everyone's saying the Fed's policy is taking us straight into a recession. They're going to crash the economy. They're crashing various markets, and that's an extreme point of view that they're taking. If you continue to tighten the money supply, if you think about it, and you increase the unemployment rate, and businesses can't grow, they can't. For example, you're in your business, you can't go and put out maybe an extra, you know, $2,000 for every listing to spruce it up. You don't have the extra budget. So that changes the way you do business. You can't afford your assistant anymore because you're closing 25% more transactions. So you have to let that person go. So that's kind of a very small example of how it works. And so if you imagine how that impacts an entire population of a country, because the money's not flowing anymore and we're not making great money. The thing is that the Fed's standpoint right now, what they're willing to take the beating for, is that they get to say the job market is still doing well despite 3 consecutive raises in the Fed funds rate. People are
Mm,
still working and people are still spending money. Because if the Fed funds rate going up 3 times in a row results in you seeing these numbers that come out in the CPI report going down, and you see that people are not buying at the same rate and prices are coming down, then they're going to say, hey, what we're doing is working, and there's still people there are still jobs available in the market. So not only do we have a healthy job market, but we have the prices coming down. What we're doing is working. That's what they're betting on. If it
mhm,
doesn't work and they raise the funds rate again by the end of the year, and then we have another 50, 75, potentially 25 basis point rate hike in November, unless we see some of the inflation numbers go down, then I think what you might see in 2023 is unemployment rates going up and interest rates going down, but you're dealing with a
mm,
lot of people that just don't have the money to spend. So it creates a
mm,
different level of problems. Um,
mm,
I think that we can expect that if what they're doing goes as planned, then you're going to see a lot of people losing their jobs, and you're going to see the economy slowing down significantly, because that's what they want it to do. That's the
mhm,
point of what they're doing. And that's what I think we have left to expect. So if you're doing
mm,
real estate, and real estate's very hyper local, right? So in your local market, if I'm thinking in terms of my business, then I'm thinking, hey, I might have 4 leads where I had 16. So I have 1/4 of the prospects that I had before, which means that I'm going to have to convert at a 50% ratio in order to close the same amount I was closing before, right? So you have to
mhm,
think about your conversion, you have to be aware, you have to be available, you have to take those phone calls at hours you might have not wanted to take those phone calls last year, and you just have to be a lot more present to stay afloat. And that's so that you're not contributing, I guess, to this overall declining economy, which it's
Mhm.
inevitable, right? You're going to make
Right.
less money if there are less deals. I think another problem that this creates is sellers being on the fence, right? If we think
Mhm.
that prices would drop anywhere between 15 to 25% in 2023 because of a recessionary period, then what happens? How many more sellers do you think are going to be motivated to sell? So unless
Right.
they have to, they're probably not. So again,
Right.
it heightens the opportunities and the prospects that you have now. We haven't yet truly felt the impact of what I think that the tightening of the money supply will do for the economy. We have
Mhm.
been at a coast, even though this year it was very jarring to see interest rates jump as rapidly as they did, and it had a huge impact on real estate and what's in our daily lives. So that's what we've been focused on. Oh my gosh, I was doing 50 deals, now I'm only doing 25. Well, that 25 could turn into 12. We
Mhm.
still haven't seen the worst of it yet, just simply because we don't know how this is going to impact people's ability to buy, because they're targeting demand. They need to be able to decrease demand and hurt the purchasing power in order for them to get the inflation under control. So if less people are
Mhm.
even capable of affording and less people can buy, then that is definitely going to impact the real estate industry significantly.
Right. Absolutely. So when do you think that we'll see the full force of the tightening of the money supply? And I mean, granted, where it's at right now, I mean, I know mortgage rates have gone, up to, I think it was like 2008 highs or something, in that ballpark. And so, there, as of right now, what I've heard is possibly, like you said, I think a 50% hike, or 50 basis point hike in November, which I think is the next Fed meeting, and then possibly December if there is a meeting, but they would pretty much raise the interest rates until the end of the year. So when would we feel the impact of that?
Well, I think after this one, you're going to see some changes in the last quarter of this year. I think we're going to see a lot of them through the last quarter of this year and the first quarter of next year. I think too, there's a possibility of mortgage rates actually dropping by March next year. If I had to make a
Mhm.
prediction, I could totally be
Mhm.
wrong. If I had to make a prediction, I would say that, and that would be coupled with prices going down further. And then you still have a problem with inventory. So if demand picks up a little bit, and prices are a little bit lower, which is why I think people from a business perspective should really be focused a lot on buyers and opportunities that come up with buyers. And then, of course, you always have the segment of the industry that is taught to go out and create inventory, right?
Mhm.
So it's a very tough question to answer. I think if we could time the market, then these conversations, many of us wouldn't be having these conversations because we'd be living on islands and we'd be very rich because we know exactly how to time the market.
Right.
There's no way. I just don't think there are way too many unknown variables, and there is lack of transparency completely in this entire system for us to be
Mhm.
able to sit down and confidently say we know where this is headed. The clearest truth that I can give you is that we have no idea how this is going to truly impact everything from a national and global scale. We know that that the point of what the Fed is doing is to stabilize pricing, like they continuously say. They want pricing to get stable. They want to balance out the supply and demand, and they want to see that there are small improvements in various sectors continuously before they ease up on this rate increase. And we think that that could happen in 2024, but it really just depends on how these next two quarters go.
Hmm. So how safe is Jerome Powell's job? I know he just got nominated. I think it was another like 2-year term or something like that, right? So right now he's steering the ship, but like let's say for instance there's a political change in the presidency and somebody else comes in and they can appoint like a new federal chairperson, and that person then could start their own monetary policy and do the complete opposite of what Jerome Powell's doing and kind of throw everything back into question, like a questionable territory, right?
Yeah, they can shake things up.
Yeah,
They
that's
can
what
shake.
the word I was looking for, yeah.
Well, it depends. So let's say as an American people, do we want someone that is going to come in and say, "Hey guys, the inflation is not as big of a problem as you think it is. Let's get the money supply back moving. Let's cut the Fed funds rate and let's get this ball moving."
I don't.
So right. So I don't either. So it's a
Right.
very tough question to answer. So if someone comes in and depending on who we put in office next, and they do come in and they say, hey, we're going to do things a little bit differently, we would hope that they understand that we have a really big problem on our hand. As much as
Mhm.
we don't want the money supply to be tightened, and as much as we don't want unemployment to get worse, if we don't get inflation under control, let's talk about another real time example. So Ryan, let's say that you and I were married and we wanted to retire in 20
Mhm.
years. And in 20 years, in order to retire without having any sort of discomfort in our retirement, to maintain a modest lifestyle, we would need to make around $100,000 to live the rest of our lives with the ability to travel, buy our grandkids, gifts, and also be able to afford the cost of living in California. Okay, so
Mhm.
$100,000, pretty
Mhm.
modest. All right. Now that $100,000 in 20 years is going to be the equivalent to maybe $50,000 that we
Right.
would be living. So you and I could not afford retirement in 20 years if the inflation rate doesn't get under control. And those
Right.
are not calculated examples. I'm just trying to give a general example here of why inflation matters. We have to stop thinking short term.
Mm.
I've been in the mortgage business for 20 years. I don't have a salary. I'm 100%, my family eats when we do business. So I don't
Mm.
want to face a very cold winter in the real estate industry, but it's inevitable because if it doesn't happen, we don't get price stabilization. No one's going to be able to afford the house, and I won't have a job in 2 years, right? So
Right.
we have to sometimes take our own personal needs out of the equation in the conversation and understand what's happening globally. Inflation does need to get under control, and I think that we should consider that when we go to the voting polls here in the near future.
Awesome. Well, I know how you doing on time?
I have to leave in 10 minutes for Tahoe.
Oh, you okay, nice. You're going to the event.
No, the
Yeah.
Chet Black event is next week. I have a speaking thing tonight at 6,
Okay.
another event with a realtor. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Awesome. Um, yeah, so getting the inflation under control. So I have a question for you. This is something that I was talking with my family about a couple weeks ago, and as far as raising the minimum wage, because that then can create more money in the economy and heat the economy up. But it's also a necessary something that we would have to do to be able to keep pace with inflation and to be able to as you're saying, like if we don't get inflation under control, then money gets more expensive as we're seeing, and so you would have to have your wages go up and in order to keep pace with that and pay your rent and pay your mortgage and those types of things. So would you be in favor of raising the minimum wage, and let's just say just for the state of California, or would you like not to, it doesn't matter if people aren't going to care if you say yes or no, but like it's just a question that I'm just curious about because it's something I've
Absolutely.
been struggling with.
Of course. Yeah, it's a great question. So when I think in terms of capitalism and versus what I think other alternatives are to capitalisms in the United States, I think that I think we do need to, I'd rather see that the minimum rate wage has been raised than I would like to see people who are living off of the, government aid, right? So I'd rather have people have the opportunity to make more money instead of trading their opportunity to work to stay home because the unemployment check is actually better for them than what it would be to have a net income when they go out to work. So that's
Mm,
where my perspective is. So if you during the COVID time, if you were able to get off work and you were able to collect compensation like unemployment or other sorts of compensation in lieu of working, then you were making more than if you went back to work, right? So what
right,
was the point of going back to work and
right.
taking less of a net income when you're making just about the same sitting at home taking an unemployment check? So if we want the labor force to be strong and we want this, like, for example, 2-to-1 ratio to change, meaning 2 jobs available for every one person that's willing to work, why aren't people willing to work? There's two
Right.
answers to that. One, they're not getting paid enough for the trouble. They don't have enough flexibility in their day. Maybe it's a woman that has a child and it costs more for her to go to work and pay for daycare than it does for her to stay home and care for her own children. There's so many
Hmm.
different examples that we can think of. And there's
Right.
also the creator economy. I saw a TikTok of this lady who has almost 1 million followers on TikTok. She is uneducated. She dropped out of college. She's a six-figure earner in the tech industry. Her employer caught wind of one of her TikToks that violated their policy and she was fired. So instead of going to look for another job, guess what she's doing? Starting her own company. So we see a lot of that in the
Hmm.
creator economy. There are 17-year-olds who are making $50,000 a month. So I think that there's a lot of reasons why we have this 2-to-1 ratio in the job market where people just don't want to work. But I think that if we can raise the minimum wage and pay people better, we might limit the profit margins for big major corporations. But that's not going to hurt them as much as it'll hurt the overall economy if people aren't paid more. So I do think people should get paid more. And I think that they should rely less on government aid and have more opportunities for work.
Hmm. Awesome. And what is your take on the quiet quitting culture, which is like a huge movement right now? And like our GDP is down. It's like one of the lowest, as you know. And I mean, you use recessionary not as like a actual factual term, but
Right.
there are some people that suggest we actually are in a recessionary environment
Right.
because the GDP numbers. And like since our GDP is so low, and now we have the quiet quitting culture, which is basically saying I'm not doing overtime, I'm not doing anything extra. Basically, what you're asking me to do, the incentives are like at an all-time low for showing up at your job. Like, how worried are you about that?
Well, I wouldn't say worried. I think there's a lot of people that are not properly rewarded for going above and beyond, right? And I think that shift in a mindset is great. Here's the difference though. Okay? I've never in my life traded my ability to earn for a salary. So
Hmm.
if you're asking for a salary because you want stability, my philosophy, my personal philosophy, I don't impose this on anyone, is that you cannot ask for freedom and stability in the same breath. So if you're relying on a company to provide for you a job that's stable, every other week you're going to get that check, you have the benefits, you're doing this, then you have to be able to conform to their rules. And sometimes that's going to require going above and beyond the scope of your job to be able to get further ahead. Those are the
Right.
rules in corporate America. If you
Right.
don't like those rules, go start your own company, right? Because
Yeah.
no one gets to tell me what time to show up. No one tells me what time to leave. No one tells me when to stop taking phone calls. And no one tells me what that mile is, whether it's extra or under, right? So
Hmm.
I think that if you've reached a point in your career where you want to say, I'm not working the overtime, I'm not taking the call, I'm not touching my email on the Saturday, I'm not answering that at 7:01 because I clocked out at 7 p.m., then I think you really need to ask yourself, are you asking for freedom and stability at the same time? Because those two things don't work together. Now, if you think that you're entitled to more compensation, then maybe you should sharpen your negotiation skills and go ask for it. If you have the results and you bring those results to the table and you can have a very calm and clear conversation with someone who's your employer, whose bottom line depends on your productivity, 9 out of 10 times you can get what you want. And if you can't, you just went through a phenomenal exercise and you should be worth being able to go negotiate another job somewhere else. Because guess what? There's 2 jobs available for every one person in the labor force right now. So there's work out there. You can go find the other jobs. There is work out there for highly qualified people that think they're going the extra mile and not being compensated for it. Now, there are also tons of people who are absolutely not working a full 40 hours a week, who are enjoying the benefits of remote work, who absolutely love taking advantage of the clock. So let's not get those two things confused, because anytime there's a big movement, there's a lot of people that jump on that train that really shouldn't be on it.
Right. That's yeah. It's a really good point. Well, I know we're short on time, and I'd love to do this again. I know there's some topics um, that we still haven't been able to talk about in as much detail as I think we would. Let me start that over. So I know we're short on time, and I know that there are some other topics that we still have on our list that we would love to talk about. So would you be willing to come back and do another interview?
Yeah, of course. I'm gonna go have do
Awesome.
some homework and get back on it.
Yeah, awesome. So how can people, and thank you for that. How can people find you, and how can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, so my name is on the screen, Patty Goodspeed. The Patty's with a D. PattyGoodspeed.com has all my contact information. I'm Patty Goodspeed across all social media platforms as well. So you can reach out to me. I'm available for loan approvals. I'm available for meeting with clients, doing consultations with your buyers and sellers. I'm available to coach office teams on talking points for rebuttaling many of the objections that people are facing today. Again, above all else, I do have 20 years of experience in this business. I've seen some cycles. I'm going through, I'm going through the same volatility you are, and I'm still showing up every single day. So I'd be more than happy to partner with real estate agents, get buyers approved, help sellers make decisions looking at the numbers, coaching teams, and so on. So you can find me. I'm there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today, Patty.
It's
So
my pleasure.
everybody else, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I said it's my pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, so everybody else, go ahead and we're gonna end the video now, and then Patty, just hang tight real quick while I stop the video.
Okay, cool.
All right.